Hi, I'm Sam Hazledine and I'm here with Dr. Angela Lim to talk about the mind and specifically how the mind relates to doctors and how doctors can best master this as an area to make it an asset for them and for themselves and their careers. Angela is the founder of Clearhead, which is an online platform which is focused on the mind. It's focused on mental health and on removing barriers to people seeking help by increasing accessibility. So I'm really personally excited about this because Angela has a wealth of knowledge in this space, and because I know, as you do, that the mind has such a compounding effect on every area of our lives and of our practices as doctors. So welcome, Angela.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Look, it's fantastic to have you here. So why don't we just start with, why is mental health so important? And specifically, why is it so important for doctors?
Yeah, mental health is really the foundation in which one operates. And being doctors, we're constantly faced with a huge cognitive load. We deal with in some cases, traumatic cases that has emotional load that we then take on. And if we don't have the foundation on how to deal with that, then we can't actually be good doctors. But also on top of that, how can we find the balance so that our jobs and the unique challenges that our jobs bring doesn't end up ultimately making us lose our joy for the job. So I think talking about mental health and how that can actually help us have a sustainable career and one that we enjoy the journey, I think is what we want to try and cover today.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, in healthcare, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super challenging. One of the things that I have found very interesting is through doing this job about learning about mental health in the workplace is actually, we always hear these statistics about this very high bullying going on in the healthcare system. And it always perplexes me because, we think about how a lot of people who come into healthcare have very good intention to help others. So why would we be bullying each other? And what I learned through this process is that actually the work environment, for example, when you're constantly under-resourced, you're constantly having to work overtime because we don't have enough staffing, actually ultimately are the conditions that drive bullying. And bullying is simply a maladaptation to an environment that actually isn't very healthy. And so rather than taking this approach of bullying is because they're bad individuals, is looking at whether the environment creates a way in which individuals are coping in a way that's unhealthy.
Absolutely. When things are so prevalent, I think it is really important to remember that these things are symptoms, aren't they? They're not the cause. So, for individual doctors, this is going to be a great session around, what they can do in their mind space. But if they are struggling in that space, it really isn't their fault. But the beauty of it is it's, with a system that's so difficult, while we may not be at fault, it is our responsibility, isn't it, to take care of ourselves, to learn about those foundations of building great mental health, even though the environment is difficult. Yeah, so today we're going to cover a few areas. We're going to talk about, we're going to start with how do you actually want to be? Because isn't it important to, paint a target, I guess. Then we're going to talk about what you can do to achieve that. And importantly, I think we're going to talk about why many doctors, many people don't actually do these foundational things, because that understanding helps us to actually get started and to follow through so that we can build a foundation of great mental health.
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So first of all, we're going to start with how do you want to be? Let's paint the target. Let's talk about, from your perspective, Angela, what are some of the questions? What are some of the ways you approach this so that as a doctor, you can, be aiming at something as opposed to running away from something else?
So I think the first thing is really not coming from this sort of deficit model and instead to think about it from a strengths model. And what I mean by that is often we can try and think about talking about this issue in the context of like, I have a problem, I'm trying to solve the problem. Instead, we want you to take today's conversation in a more aspirational way. How do I want to be? How do I want to show up as an individual, both at home and at work? And so I think as a starting point is when I think about mental health and in my own journey, I think about what I have been able to achieve by being able to master my emotions, being able to be in control of my mind, how setting mindsets that tells me that I can do what everyone else tells me is impossible, and really overcoming in some ways self-constructed barriers that we have placed on ourselves, because instead of us running our mind is running us. And so when I think back about what I've been able to achieve, it is very much around the context of mastering the mind. And so that's kind of the way that I frame thinking about mental health. But what about you, Sam?
I love that. I think it's, who do I want to be, not who do I not want to not be? What's the positive as opposed to the double negative? And, I think so often when we are tired, when there's a lot of burnout, we're struggling, we can focus on what do we not want to be. But I think, and so if you're struggling, there's some great questions, how do I want to feel? How do I want to impact people? How do I want to perform? Who do I want to be in a crisis? I think a useful way to do that is to think about, role models as well. And look at some of those doctors. I can still remember the doctors who impacted me. Dr. Chris Jackson, who's now an oncologist in Dunedin. And, he was enthusiastic. He was, got on well with the staff, with the nursing staff, with the juniors, with seniors. He was cool in a crisis. And, I find role models a great way to go, what is the target I want to paint? Have you used that as well, Angela?
In the context of mentors, I actually have found that this journey around mental health is one that is actually very personal, and that I actually don't think it's very easy to have individuals that I would sort of look at, because a lot of times when you think about what the mind is about, it's the 95% below the iceberg stuff that nobody knows about. And even with individuals who have been more transparent about sharing their challenges, and maybe conveying that they have overcome their challenges, you actually don't really know. And then sort of sometimes the story unfolds and it shows that they're actually still struggling. And so I think for me, it's very much, it's a very, in some ways I'd say a bit of a solo and spiritual journey, not in the context of religion, but that one goes on this journey, like a hero's journey, that only you know all the challenges that you're facing, and only you know what are the barriers that you have in front of you that you have to work through. Nobody can tell you, but that kind of comes down to maybe one of the core foundations of this, which is, do you have self-awareness in order to recognize that what are the barriers that you have placed in front of yourself that you have to work through? That's kind of something that I think about.
A great thing about this program, for example, is we're getting different doctors with different perspectives. Because I agree with you, we're all so individual, and anyone who tells you they've got the answer, they're selling something, and you should probably run a mile, because all and I remember I read a quote recently, which wisdom can't be taught; it can only be learned. And so I think what you can do is, what we are doing is you sort of dropping breadcrumbs, dropping ideas, dropping strategies that can work, and everyone has actually got to come up with their own personal recipe. Because we're all so different backgrounds, different medical trainings, different experiences, into infinity. And so that's the great thing about this, is just, finding some of those pathways, and for individuals going on that journey. I think there's a piece around that as well, which is really important, which is you don't have to figure it all out immediately. This is actually a journey that will ever unfold and evolve. And I think one of the important things about life is as we go through these phases, is learning how to to grow and evolve through those sort of gear changes, from high school to medical school, from medical school to being an intern, from being an intern to actually getting on specialty training and then becoming a specialist. And all these different areas of our life require us to show up differently. And so we're going to be ever evolving in the space of mastering our minds.
Yeah, and I do want to sort of double click on that point about this being very individual, in the sense that why it's sometimes hard is, for example, even if you take something like workload, right? Like one person's workload might be, the same workload might be overwhelming for one individual, and for another individual, they are sort of not sufficiently stimulated and they need more. So, this is a very personal definition for you to determine, and only you can figure that out. I can't tell you, Sam can't tell you, but you need to do the self-work to determine what your personal boundaries are and what personally defines good mental health for you. And it will look different, even if you have siblings or you have parents, or even if you have a twin, what is important for you and your twin will be completely different.
Since we've started with this aspirational, what are we aiming at? And we're all going to come up with our own definition of what we're aiming at. However that looks. And I think that's the first part, is we all have the permission to actually create a personal target. And then let's move on to, okay, we've got this target. We know who we want to be as an individual, as a doctor. What can we do about it? That's the second thing. It's like, okay, I know where I'm aiming at, but now what am I going to do? And in preparation for this, Angela, we talked about two areas that we're going to cover off. We're going to talk about what we can do in the moment, how we can actually show up here and now. And then the other, we're going to talk about what are those habits? What are those things that drive experiential change over time? And I think both, in my experience, are incredibly important, because we have to be able to, particularly as doctors, manage ourselves here and now. But we also, there's certain types of behavior, change, emotional, behavioral change. It doesn't happen it happens, right now, but it happens over time, consistently building. So let's talk about those two areas. Do you want to add anything to that before we jump into it?
Let's jump into it.
So let's talk about in the moment. What does that mean for you?
Often when we talk about mental health, when we're thinking, for example, about anxiety is because you're worrying about the future. And then when we think about depression, it's because maybe you're thinking about all the things that has happened in the past. And the only moment in time in which actually you have control of is just the present, right now, right here, right now. And yes, you might be in a situation where, let's just say that you're really worried about whether you're going to pass exams. And this might be your third goal, and it might be your final goal. What would happen if I can't pass exams, and all those years of commitment would be for nothing? And you don't know. The truth is, you don't know. You don't know whether you are sufficiently prepared enough that you will pass the exam or not. And so, but what you do know is that right now, you are surrounded by people who are very supportive of you. You have been able to carve time out to study. You have a really supportive colleagues that can help you so that you don't have to stay 2 hours overtime every day, and you can leave work on time so that you can do 2 hours of study. And if you kind of concentrate and focus on those in the moment stuff, that can actually help you address a lot of the anxiety or the type of low mood that is associated with either events in the future that may or may not come to pass, or events in the past that should not define who you are today and what you can do moving forward. So I think that there are steps that you can take in which to be able to stay present. One of the things is meditation. When your mind is going 1,000 miles an hour and it's thinking about things that may or may not happen, how can you be in control of your mind? You are the rider on that horse. How can you bring and control that horse? Because you are in control. But you need the skills to do that. And meditation is one way in which you can practice the skill of controlling your mind. That's kind of one of the things that I think about in order to help with meditation, in order to help with being mindful and present in the moment, so that we are not letting our mental health suffer unnecessarily. So
For me, with the in the moment, I found, I three questions that I asked myself that actually helped me to show up in my best way is, what am I choosing to focus on? What meaning am I giving it? And what am I going to do about it? Because if we, to your example, if we're choosing in that situation to focus on, I've failed twice, I'm probably, what meaning am I going to give it? Well, I'll probably fail again. What am I going to do about it? Well, that leads to procrastination of whatever, all sorts of things. Whereas if you go, what am I choosing to focus on? I'm super prepared and I've got this shot. What meaning am I going to give it? An empowering meaning of, possibility. I can do this. What am I going to do about it? When I'll focus, I'll study, I'll do whatever. And I remember, a silly example from I used to get really worried when I was working ED nights in Coffs Harbour. And this is back in the day where as a PGY2, you'd run nights and run an ED by yourself without the skills to do so. And I'd get really worried about the morning handovers because I just felt like I was going to look like an absolute idiot. And I often probably did. I remember there's this one time. And that's kind of what I did. Every morning I'd be like, what am I focusing on? Oh, I've got too much. I'm going to look like an idiot. What meaning am I giving it? Well, I'm an idiot. What am I going to do about it? Well, I do a pretty crappy handover. But this one time, there was this doctor who's coming on, this specialist, the ED specialist. His name is Dennis Tack. Now, Dennis is the coolest man who's ever lived. Dennis was, he was in the United States Air Force, code sign Iceman. Top Gun based the character of Iceman on him. He then left the Air Force and started a band, Radio Birdman. He by Rolling Stones magazine's 73rd greatest guitar player of all time. Then he finished that up and became an emergency department doctor. So I thought Dennis was incredibly cool. So I was like, that's what I was focusing on. The coolest doctor in the world is coming in the morning for me to hand over. What meaning am I going to give it? Well, I'm going to shine. And so I prepared, instead of sleeping from the 4 till 7, I prepared my handover and I absolutely nailed it. Stupid example, but it just goes to show, I think, how when we direct our minds, we can actually call forth a better part of ourselves.
Yeah, and also, I think if I think about my own personal experiences, what we might consider failures often end up being the catalyst to something better. Like, for example, I didn't I think I was waitlisted as an undergrad for medical school. I think I was 3 off the list or something silly. And in the end, I didn't get in, and I actually got in as a postgraduate. But at that time, of course, it's a sense of failure. But what I then learned is, because I didn't get in the first time, I really had to push myself to ask the questions of why do I want to be a doctor? Why am I going back into further studies? And through that journey, it led me to building a lot of the experiences and the skills that got me to here I am today, where I have the skills and the networks and the understanding of the health system to try and disrupt it in a positive way, and be able to create systems, use technology to envision a better healthcare system and get people more accessible care. But could I have done all of this today if I got accepted straight in through undergrad? Probably not, because I would never have had the impetus to develop the skills to broaden my experience. And to your point, Sam, meaning making of things that don't go well our way is hugely influential in the type of life we get to lead. And so if you're experiencing any sort of challenges right now, or it just feels like life is super unfair, or things are super hard, or you feel like a failure, find meaning in how this can one day help you be someone better. Even if it's you're a better doctor because you're more compassionate to your patients, because you know that life doesn't always go A+ all the time, that things don't go smoothly. That in itself can be the thing that can anchor you on why you can be a better doctor.
We've picked a tough career where there's going to be ups and downs. And so, that meaning making skill is so important. And you talked about meditation. What are some of the other habits that you would recommend to drive long-term change? I guess habits that we talked about it earlier, increase self-awareness. And by increasing self-awareness, we increase emotional intelligence and we build resilience. Like, what are some of the habits that you would recommend?
Other than meditation, the other thing that's big for me is journaling, because that actually uses a slightly different part of your brain and helps make connections that fosters a part of what we've been talking about, which is around meaning making. Because you've had to kind of, in some ways, process all your emotions, all your thoughts in a way that you can then put it down on a piece of paper. So that in itself is super helpful. For others, maybe if you don't have quite the skill set to do it yourself, we really encourage you to think about what it means to access therapy. Most hospitals will have an EAP program. And that means the employer pays for your therapy, basically. It's the least they can do. They put you in a super stressful environment. So that's how you think about, getting professional help. The other thing as well is just physical exercise. Your body and your mind is a very tight feedback loop. How you feel physically will affect how you feel mentally and vice versa. So if you feel you don't have what it takes to break the pattern that you've gotten into in terms of your mental health, then focus on your physical health. And once you start feeling good in your body, that would naturally help you feel good. There's all sorts of, obviously, chemicals that our body releases that will help you improve your mental health as well. So all of those things are I consider basic hygiene. And then, of course, sleep. Sleep is the great reset. When you're feeling terrible after receiving some bad news or you think that you've messed up, sometimes just taking the time to just go to sleep, then suddenly the things that you thought felt catastrophic, maybe it wasn't so bad after a night's sleep, and having the discipline to not let yourself keep beating yourself up. Yes, you messed up. You didn't hand over a really important case, and now the patient has to have a whole bunch of other investigation that happened because of you not handing over this critical piece of information. The past is the past, but you can use that as a learning for the next patient that you have. And I think not showing some level of self-compassion to yourself so that you don't keep beating yourself up is also really key in helping build self-awareness, build emotional intelligence, and ultimately resilience in the ups and downs of life.
I fully echo what you say there. I think earlier in my career I was good at the meaning making, but I hadn't built habits that would build that long-term self-awareness. And so it almost felt like I was sort of lurch from situation to situation to situation. And it wasn't until I actually got a daily meditation practice, and it didn't notice anything to start with. It was about 4.5 months into it when I started noticing this shift in myself. And it was the daily practice that supports the moment to moment meaning making that I found really, really powerful.
And I think let's take a side tour and talk about forming habits. And you mentioned quite a few things. The first is that the best way to build habits is to do one thing daily. But before you go into habits, actually think about why you want to build this habit. So have a goal that will motivate you. And then out of that goal, say, okay, what's one thing that I could do? So let's just say, for example, I want to be more in control of my emotions or my thoughts in the busyness of the workday. And the one thing I can do is to practice meditation. And I'm going to make it super achievable. I'm just going to do a 2-minute meditation every morning. And I'm going to do it, straight after I brush my teeth. Or something that you're going to do and encounter every day. Or for me, when I started my meditation practice, I actually did it on the train to work. So every morning when I sat on the train, it was a 15-minute train ride. I would spend that 15 minutes meditating. So it was a daily practice. It was something I had an external cue that I would follow, which is catching the train. The third is accountability. So after every meditation, I would message my friend and said, I've done my meditation, have you? Because we were just by chance both wanting to pick up a meditation practice. And the final thing to know is it takes time. I think we've all heard of this like 21-day rule. That's a myth. Well, not a myth. It's actually it's a study that was misattributed to habit forming. And actually, yes, it was actually, and again, a side tour to the side tour. It was actually it's a study done by a plastic surgeon, that he found that it takes 21 days for people to get used to their new look after surgery.
Right, so a very specific situation.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with a behavior change, basically.
I mean, the beauty of this, to anyone listening, you're listening to two doctors talk about evidence-based approaches to the mind. We're not selling you anything, and we're not trying to, sell you into our course on Instagram. So...
But what the research have shown is that it takes somewhere between 18 days to 265 days before someone, forms a habit. So then on average, the average was 10 weeks, basically. So if it's taking you time and it's taking more than the 3 weeks that you hear about, that's completely normal. The average is 10 weeks, and for some people as long as 8 months. But then you have to kind of really think about setting something that is achievable. The other thing that's really interesting to know as well is like some people were like, you said doing it daily is super important. I forgot to do it yesterday. Therefore, all of this is for naught. That's not true as well. If you missed out a day or two, just get back on it. That one day you missed is not going to suddenly reset you back to zero. The other thing that most people think about is like, habits require to have some sort of like very good like self-control. For example, maybe your habit is like, you don't want to snack or drink coffee at night because then it'll affect your sleep, and your sleep being affected affects your mental health, for example. You don't necessarily have to practice self-control. It's about using automatic behaviors, what they call, I think it's systems 1 processing, that automatically happens versus what they call systems 2, which is you have to tell yourself, I want to, do this because of this reason, where then motivation and stuff like that can wane over time. What you want to do is just take all that cognitive load out. It's just like brushing your teeth. You wake up, you brush your teeth. So you wake up, you meditate, or you wake up, you do you sort of do a gratitude, or you before you go to bed, you journal, or you go for a run for 5 minutes every day. Like whatever that practice is, find something that you can consistently do and trust that it just will take time, but it will be worth it.
That's a great point, isn't it? That the cue is the first step in any form of habit formation, and if we don't have that, we've just made it difficult for ourselves, I guess. I thanks for sharing that. We didn't talk about that in this preparation. It made me reflect back on, I've tried to meditate throughout my life for a lot, because we all know it's good for us. And once I was like, right, 30 days to create a habit. Obviously, I'm listening to the wrong study. And so I did transcendental meditation, 20 minutes twice a day. It was hell at the start, and it was hell at the end. And I was like, if I'm not enjoying it after 30 days, this is not for me. So I gave up and tried again. But it was exactly your point, is how I started getting into meditation was, all right, I can do 2 minutes a day. And so I just did 2 minutes of mindful breathing. And then I found an app, which was 10 minutes a day, waking up. And I was able to do it. And it was the consistency of doing it. It was like 4.5 months in, then I started to notice some changes. But I think it's great to understand that, again, there aren't these hard and fast rules. And we've all got to remember as well, we're all on a standard distribution curve as well. So for some people, it might take 3 weeks. Some same habit might take 4 months for someone, and that's okay. So I love the approach you're sharing is kind of taking the pressure out of it, about making it perfect.
I think the thing that can be frustrating listening to us is it all sounds so simple, but just because it's simple, it's not easy. These things take time, and I know that it took me years. Like, my parents were constantly telling me, you need to start meditating, and I was just like, whatever. And then then one day I just felt like, oh, just by chance, because my friend wanted to develop a meditation practice, and that was what it took to kind of get into it. But I've been told to meditate for years. And the other thing that I think is really important when trying to develop these habits is, I think we can wait for the big sign that this thing that I'm trying to do is actually working. But actually, can we look for the little signs? So for example, when I started meditating, I just was able to concentrate a lot better. I was just able to be able to feel that I'm not struggling as hard when I'm thinking about complex problems. So I was very attuned to looking for the little signs of how things were feeling better when I started the practice. And or for example, it might just be, actually, I am doing this because I want to stop bringing my stress home. And I don't want to keep taking my stress home to my partner and getting upset at my partner. And I'm gonna, I'm gonna start journaling before I interact with anyone at home, so that I could unload all the things that was upsetting me and the day on my journal. And so I'm not taking it out on my partner or my child. And then it might not be like immediately, but maybe you find yourself, instead of arguing every day, you're arguing every second day. And then it's every third day, and then it's once a week. Can you look out for the signs that you're on the right track, rather than just thinking that you're going to start journaling and then suddenly you're going to stop fighting with your partner?
And that's possibly a particular trap for doctors who are, you think your days back to medical school, everyone's a high achiever, and at least academically, but most people are high achievers in multiple areas of their life. And high achievers often fall into that trap of, unless I'm really good at it, I'll just give up. And that's a great one. Again, I go back to my sort of journey with meditation. I was looking for, where's the joy and the inner peace? And so I'd give up because it hadn't worked after 30 days. And if I had more looked at, well, I was a little less reactive in that situation, and started to look for the, rather than looking for what's not working about it, I haven't reached nirvana, look for what's the little things that say I'm on the right track. Because those, big things, these big changes happen gradually over time, don't they? So, to anyone listening, I think this has been useful for me, listening, even though we talked about this beforehand, it's, it is so important, and it is particularly important in doctors, and it's, mastering our minds and our mental health is an area that has a compounding effect on every area of our life. And so we've talked about, what are we aiming at? How do I want to be? Like, really creating that target of the person, the doctor I want to be. We've talked about what we can do. In the moment, about meaning, and longer term in terms of habits. We talked about what some of those, habit behaviors are, and what some of the habits, that can sort of support this area, being meditation, being journaling, as the two we talked about. And that sort of, well, implicitly, we understand, when people don't do this, it's because, we've missed the small things. We've expected too much of ourselves. We, haven't built the conditions to create a habit. So, if anyone, I guess, to anyone who's listening, let's talk about, where to from here. You want to start on a journey of really making this a strength. And let's be honest, like, if anyone's got into med school and has become a doctor, this is actually, to some extent, a strength. You have skills in this area. It's the last 2% that we're talking about. What's the last little bit that gets you a lot of the results? Where would you recommend people start?
I think it's really just taking the time to even just ask yourself the question of, like, what do you want? I think the thing, as you mentioned about type A personalities and high achievers, is it can be very easy for you to just be on that treadmill and, like, I got to be a consultant by the age of 30. And you're just doing all these things that then when you get to that end goal, you're like, why did I sacrifice not going to my best friend's wedding? Why did I sacrifice, not being able to just have like a little bit of time for myself, whether it's to sleep, to read, to just stay fit, whatever it is. And I can't tell you that, Sam can't tell you that. You just have to be super honest with yourself. It's like, what type of life do you want to lead so that you enjoy the journey, and you're not going to look back with regret once you get to your destination, because you will get to your destination. Like, we're just the type of people that will achieve things. So put that aside, worrying about achieving the goals, and just think about how you want to be as a person on the way to achieving those goals. And then find one thing that's super simple that you could do differently that will help you achieve that goal one step closer. We didn't really talk about it, but there's actually a longitudinal study, the longest longitudinal study done in Harvard. I think it's been going for more than 80 years. And one of the number one thing that determines someone's happiness, someone's longevity, across socioeconomic positions is social connection. We always talk about having to make sacrifice in our lives to achieve whatever career goals that we have. And it's always what we don't explicitly say is the sacrifice is the social connections that we have, our family, our friends. But that is the number one determinant of your happiness. And so something to think about as well is how can you make sure that you at least have someone that you can say that if my car breaks down at 2 a.m., I have someone I can call for help. And whatever you do to maintain at least one social connection, in addition to all these self-practices that we've described that helps you be more self-aware about your needs, to help you be better in control of your minds, so that you can stay mentally well and enjoy the journey. And if you do that, I think that you will look back in your life with a little more compassion of the ups and downs, and a little bit more joy, and a little less regret.
That's a great place that for us all to be in. I mean, I think that it's interesting, as you were saying that, you were sort of smiling, the drive that makes us good, gets into med school, become specialists, GPs, whatever we become in medicine, that drive and that goal orientation. I'm 45 now, looking back, and yes, it's useful for a part of me, and it's been useful in terms of building the businesses and supporting doctors and doing things, but it hasn't been the answer to your sort of peace and happiness. And actually, it's almost contrary, because you're putting so much into the future that you miss out on the moment. And to your point, this is a conversation about the mind, but it's a conversation about actually what's important, and being here now. How am I here and now, as opposed to what am I going to be like in some imagined future state? And if we can get that balance, because we'll need that balance, because we're never going to be one or the other. Or actually, I could say we could be the other. We could be very future focused, but we're never going to lose that part of ourselves. So it's what can we do to create that bring us back to here, and social connections, prioritizing what's important, finding one thing that you can do and do consistently. That would be what I would leave people with. Whether it's I'm going to meditate for 2 minutes a day, but I'm just going to do it for 2 minutes every day. And for me, I think an important part was somewhat detaching, going away from an outcome, just going, okay, instead of going, I'm going to get something from meditation, I'm going to be a meditator. I know it's good for me, so I'm just going to do it. And it took 4.5 months, and then all of a sudden I had this day when I was like, wow, I've experienced inner peace today. Completely foreign to me, and then back to normal, and then now it's most days. but it's just this 10 minutes a day. That's why I said at the start, there's a compounding effect to this mental health. And we'll share some resources as well that people can connect to. And so it's just a matter of starting. So I really appreciated this conversation. I think you've shared some real wisdom. And but you can't teach wisdom, you have to learn it. So people are on their own journey, they'll pick up what's important to them, and create their own path. So, I mean, Angela, what would you leave people with? What's some final thoughts, I guess?
Yeah, final thoughts is you're not alone. Everyone's on this journey called life. And that there is so much support available. Obviously, I run a company that's about improving mental health support access. And so there are tools on our platform that you can use that's helping you meditate, helping you track your mood, book therapy if you need it. There's hundreds of clinicians out there available to see you for your specific issue, whether it's PTSD from something you saw traumatic at work to going through a divorce because it's just been hard balancing work and life. Whatever it is, don't suffer alone. Always ask for help. And it's, possible that things will get better. And what goes up can come down, and what goes down has to come up. So this whole thing around impermanence is something to meditate on. And we're here to help. That's why we're doing this episode today. And we're not here to kind of be gurus to tell you that we figured it out. We're on our own journey. And I've been going on this self-work journey for at least 20 years. And I think I'm still at the bottom of the hill, looking up to sort of some aspirational mountain where I'll find, as you say, Sam, peace and tranquility and sort of this, super calm state. But I'm still a work in progress, and I want people to know that too.
It's a good progress you're making. I think. Thank you so much for what you've shared. As you were talking there, I'd leave people with one final thought, which is, for me, mental health's been different at different stages. As a medical student, mental health meant something quite different from me as a doctor, and then as a parent, and as a business owner. Mental health needs to evolve, and for us individually, I guess is what I'm saying. And so, whatever stage you're at, if you're listening or watching this, just look at that stage, create that compelling vision of who it is you want to be in this stage, and then there are all these tools available. Create those habits, because it's just worth it. There's a compounding effect to great mental health.